The soldier who held the line alone for 9 days and died before his name was recorded. The snow fell then, just as it falls now, a silent, relentless curtain over a world teetering on the precipice. It muffled the sounds of war, a temporary, fragile peace for the ears, but not for the soul. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Eastern Front, where the very earth seemed to bleed iron and ice, countless stories were buried, not just by the permafrost, but by the sheer, overwhelming scale of human conflict. This is not a story of generals or grand strategies, of victories etched in stone, or defeats that reshaped continents. This is a story whispered by the wind across frozen fields, a story of one man, a single flickering ember against an inferno, whose courage burned so brightly it defied the very erasure of history. His name, we are told, was never recorded. His sacrifice, a solitary stand against an overwhelming tide, was swallowed by the blizzard, lost to the annals of a war that consumed millions. But what if the most profound truths of history are not found in the official records, but in the echoes of those who were never meant to be remembered? What if the silence that followed his last breath holds more weight than any triumphant fanfare? We embark on a journey to excavate a single human story from the forgotten depths of that brutal winter, a story that asks us to consider the true cost of holding the line, not for a nation, not for an ideology, but for the simple, desperate act of survival and the unyielding spark of human will. This is about the soldier who held the line alone for 9 days, a testament to endurance etched in the frozen earth, a man whose name was lost before it could even be whispered. We will delve into the chilling reality of his final days, piecing together fragments of a life extinguished in the crucible of war, examining the immense pressures, the impossible choices, and the profound moral quandaries that defined not just his fate, but the fate of so many others caught in the relentless machinery of conflict. This narrative will not shy away from the visceral reality of battle, the sensory overload of fear and adrenaline, the gnawing cold that seeped into bone and spirit. We will sift through the dust of archives, the faded ink of letters, the chilling statistics that attempt to quantify human loss, and in doing so, we will seek to understand the weight of a single life against the backdrop of global devastation. Our quest is not merely to recount a forgotten event, but to understand the enduring questions it poses about courage, duty, and the often invisible lines that define our humanity, even when faced with the absolute absence of hope. This is the story of a ghost in the snow, a soldier whose ghost still whispers a truth the world tried to forget. The map was silent, but the forest remembered, and now, we too will remember. The winter of 1942-1943 on the Eastern Front was a brutal, unforgiving entity. It was a battlefield where nature itself seemed to conspire with the opposing armies, a stark and unforgiving antagonist in its own right. For the soldiers caught in its icy grip, the cold was not merely an inconvenience, it was a constant, insidious enemy, gnawing at their resolve, stealing their strength, and freezing their very thoughts. Imagine the landscape, an endless, undulating white, broken only by the skeletal silhouettes of barren trees and the jagged scars of artillery fire. The air, thin and sharp, bit at exposed skin, and every breath was a painful reminder of the hostile environment. Visibility was often reduced to mere yards by swirling snow, turning the familiar into the alien, and every shadow could conceal a threat. It was into this desolate tableau that our story unfolds, a narrative of extreme isolation and relentless pressure. The Soviet Union, reeling from the initial shock of invasion, was now engaged in a desperate struggle for survival. The German war machine, though formidable, had been blunted by the sheer vastness of the territory and the unyielding spirit of its defenders. This was a conflict of attrition, where individual lives were often considered expendable in the grand strategic chess game. It was on one such forgotten sector, a nameless stretch of frozen earth far from the celebrated turning points of the war, that an extraordinary act of defiance, or perhaps of sheer, unadulterated will, took place. The specific location, lost to time and the shifting sands of war, was a critical but ultimately minor strategic point. A nodal intersection of frozen rivers and sparsely populated woodlands. Its importance lay not in its inherent value, but in its potential to disrupt enemy movements. It was a place where the grand narratives of war often overlooked the individual dramas unfolding in the trenches. This was a theatre of war, where survival was a daily, hourly struggle, and where the lines between heroism and desperation blurred into an indistinguishable grey. The problem, as it often was on this front, was one of overwhelming odds. A small unit, perhaps a reconnaissance patrol, an isolated outpost, or a hastily formed defensive line, found itself cut off, surrounded, or tasked with a seemingly impossible, delaying action. The details of how this unit became so isolated are shrouded in the fog of war, a consequence of rapid advances, flanking maneuvers, or simply the brutal efficiency of a well-placed pincer movement. What is clear, however, is the catastrophic imbalance of forces that ensued. Faced with an enemy that vastly outnumbered them and with no hope of immediate reinforcement or retreat, the soldiers were presented with a stark, brutal choice: surrender or resist. And in this particular instance, it was one soldier who, for reasons we can only begin to fathom, chose to resist alone, or at least to be the last one standing, the solitary guardian of a line that had ceased to exist as a cohesive defense. This is the unique angle of our story. The profound human drama at the micro level, the individual will pitted against the crushing weight of historical forces. It's about a man whose name was never recorded, a soldier whose last stand was so solitary, so devoid of witnesses or official recognition, that he became a phantom in the archives of war. His story challenges our conventional understanding of conflict, forcing us to look beyond the grand pronouncements of victory and defeat, and to confront the silent, often agonizing choices made by individuals on the fringes of history. We are not here to glorify war, but to understand the human spirit within it, to explore the boundaries of endurance, and to ask what it truly means to hold a line when all hope of reinforcement has vanished, when the only company is the biting wind and the encroaching enemy. This is the beginning of our excavation, a descent into the heart of a forgotten front, to unearth the story of a soldier whose name was lost, but whose courage we believe deserves to be found. The blizzard raged, a white fury that erased the horizon and turned the world into a canvas of swirling snow. Within this maelstrom, a single soldier found himself adrift, not just in the physical landscape, but in the vast, indifferent currents of war. The initial engagement had been swift, brutal, and decisive. A small pocket of resistance, a valiant but ultimately doomed stand, had been overwhelmed. The sounds of battle, the crack of rifle fire, the guttural roar of artillery, the desperate cries of men, had faded, replaced by the mournful howl of the wind and the soft, insidious hiss of falling snow. He was alone. The realization settled not with a sudden shock, but with a creeping, icy dread that mirrored the cold seeping into his bones. His comrades were gone. Whether they had fallen, been captured, or managed a desperate, fragmented escape, he did not know. All he knew was the gnawing emptiness where their presence had been, the chilling silence that amplified the thrumming in his own ears. This isolation was the first, and perhaps most profound, enemy he faced. It was a psychological battlefield as treacherous as any physical one, where the mind, deprived of the shared experience and camaraderie of battle, began to conjure its own phantoms. The vastness of the white expanse became a suffocating shroud, the silence a deafening roar of his own insignificance. Yet, within this profound solitude, a flicker of something else began to ignite. It wasn't the organized, disciplined resolve of a unit fighting in formation. It was something more primal, more desperate, a stubborn refusal to yield to the overwhelming narrative of defeat. The objective, whatever it had been, was now irrelevant. The strategic importance of this frozen patch of earth had dissolved into the immediate, visceral need to simply endure. His enemy was not just the approaching soldiers, but the relentless cold, the gnawing hunger, the crushing weight of despair. He was a single point of resistance in a world that seemed intent on erasing him, a living anomaly in a landscape of death. The map, if he even still possessed one, would have shown a void, an empty space where a unit should have been. But on the ground, in the swirling snow, he was a tangible presence, a defiance etched into the very fabric of the battlefield. The prompt specifies a hook initial within the first 30 seconds, and this moment of profound isolation, of a single human confronting an overwhelming, indifferent universe, is precisely that hook. It's the universal human experience of being utterly alone, amplified by the extraordinary circumstances of war. It's the moment where the grand, impersonal forces of history collide with the raw, individual struggle for existence. This is not just a story about a soldier. It's about the enduring power of the human will, the desperate fight for survival against impossible odds, and the silent courage that can bloom in the most desolate of landscapes. The question lingers: why did he stay? Why did he choose to face the encroaching threat alone when surrender or flight might have seemed the more rational, the more survivable options? This is the mystery we begin to unravel, the central enigma that drives our narrative forward. The snow continued its relentless descent, a silent white shroud that sought to bury not just the fallen, but the very memory of their struggle. For the soldier, now truly alone, the world had shrunk to the immediate perimeter of his existence. The grand strategies, the political machinations, the pronouncements of distant leaders, all of it had receded into an abstract, meaningless hum. His reality was the biting wind, the ache in his limbs, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, and the ever-present chilling awareness of the enemy. He was no longer part of a unit, a cog in a larger machine. He was an individual, stripped bare of all pretense, confronting the stark reality of his mortality. The objective had shifted from military success to a more fundamental primal goal: survival. But survival in this context was not a passive state. It was an active, defiant posture. He began to move, not with the hurried, panicked steps of a man fleeing, but with a deliberate, measured pace. Each movement was an act of will, a conscious effort against the numbing cold and the fatigue that threatened to drag him down. He was improvising, adapting, his senses heightened, attuned to the slightest anomaly in the monotonous landscape. Was that a distant crunch of snow? A subtle shift in the wind that carried a foreign scent? His rifle, a cold, familiar weight, became an extension of his own will, a symbol of his refusal to be extinguished. He was a ghost in the whiteout, a flicker of defiance against the overwhelming tide. This is where the historical analysis begins to weave into the narrative, not as dry exposition, but as a lens through which to understand the soldier's actions. Historians later described these desperate, isolated stands as acts of heroic futility, moments where individual courage served little strategic purpose but held immense symbolic weight. They spoke of the psychological impact of prolonged isolation, the way the human mind can construct elaborate realities to stave off despair, or conversely, how it can sharpen to an almost animalistic focus on immediate survival. The concept of holding the line transformed. It was no longer about defending a geographical position. It was about defending the self, about asserting one's existence against the forces that sought to obliterate it. He was, in essence, holding a line against the void, a solitary sentinel against the encroaching silence. The prompt emphasizes sensory description, and here the cold is not just a temperature, it's a tangible presence, a force that presses in, that steals warmth, that numbs the very capacity for thought. The sounds are amplified, the creak of frozen branches, the whisper of snow against his tattered uniform, the distant, unsettling snap of a twig that could be the wind, or something far more sinister. This is the crucible, where the human spirit is tested, where the abstract notion of duty is distilled into the raw, immediate imperative to simply be. He was a living testament to the tenacity of life, a single, stubborn spark refusing to be quenched by the indifferent, frozen expanse. The weight of those 9 days began to press down on him, a tangible burden, heavier than his pack, colder than the biting wind. Each sunrise, a pale, hesitant smear of light on the horizon, was both a victory and a grim reminder of the relentless passage of time and the dwindling chances of rescue or reinforcement. He had established a rudimentary perimeter, a small pocket of defiance carved out of the unforgiving snow. He scavenged, he observed, he endured. The enemy was a constant, spectral presence, a murmur in the wind, a fleeting shadow at the edge of his vision. He learned to read the subtle signs of their approach, the disturbed snow, the faint scent of smoke, the distant muffled sounds that the blizzard could not entirely conceal. This was not the organized defense of a platoon, it was the cunning, instinctual survival of a lone wolf. He moved with the silence of a phantom, utilizing the natural camouflage of the snow-laden landscape, becoming one with the desolation. The historical context here is crucial. The Eastern Front was a theater of immense geographical scale, where units could be easily isolated and where resupply and communication lines were constantly vulnerable. The Germans, in their rapid advances, often outran their logistical support, leaving pockets of their own troops vulnerable, and conversely, the Soviets, in their desperate defense, found themselves cut off, fighting in encirclement. This soldier, regardless of his uniform, was a product of this brutal reality. His actions, though seemingly futile from a strategic standpoint, were a testament to the training and discipline instilled in him, a refusal to break even when all external structures of support had collapsed. The prompt asks for analysis of documented history, and this is where we bring in the broader context of the war's ebb and flow. While this soldier's specific actions might be lost to us, the phenomenon of isolated soldiers fighting on long after their units were destroyed was not uncommon. These were the men who became legends in their own time. Whispered tales passed around campfires, or like our subject, faded into anonymity. The psychological toll of such an existence is immense. Deprived of human contact, facing constant threat, and battling the elements, the soldier's mind would have been a battlefield in itself. We can only speculate on his thoughts, his fears, his motivations. Was he sustained by a burning patriotism, a simple, animalistic will to live, or perhaps by a profound sense of duty, a belief that by holding this ground, however insignificant, he was still contributing to a larger cause? These are the questions that haunt the edges of his story, the moral and philosophical quandaries that arise when we strip away the grand narratives and focus on the individual human experience. He was a man fighting not just an enemy, but his own encroaching despair, a silent battle waged within the stark, frozen theater of war. The snow, once a blanket of white, began to take on a more sinister hue in the soldier's perception. It was no longer just the environment, it was the enemy's camouflage, the canvas upon which their movements were painted, however subtly. He had learned to read its language. The slight depression in a drift that spoke of a recent passage, the disturbed pattern of flakes that indicated a hurried retreat or advance. His senses, honed by days of isolation and constant vigilance, were now operating at an almost preternatural level. This was the stark reality of combat on the Eastern Front, a war of attrition fought in an unforgiving landscape where survival often depended on an intimate understanding of the natural world and the ability to perceive threats that were invisible to the untrained eye. He was a hunter and the hunted, a predator in the desolate white, a prey to the encroaching darkness and the enemy that stalked it. The historical analysis here delves into the specific conditions of this front. The sheer scale of the territory meant that units could become isolated, cut off from supply lines and reinforcements. The brutal winters, with their deep snows and sub-zero temperatures, were as deadly as any enemy bullet. Soldiers on both sides spoke of the pervasive cold, the way it seeped into their very bones, numbing their extremities and their resolve. The psychological impact of such isolation and constant threat is well documented. Soldiers often experienced periods of intense anxiety, followed by a state of hypervigilance and sometimes a dissociative detachment from reality. The soldier's actions, though undocumented in terms of specific details, would have been shaped by this harsh reality. He would have rationed his meager supplies, conserved his energy, and moved with a caution born of desperation. His rifle, a cold, familiar weight, was his only companion, his sole means of asserting his will against the overwhelming forces arrayed against him. We can infer his existence through the lens of countless other soldiers who endured similar experiences, their stories forming a mosaic of suffering and resilience. The prompt emphasizes sensory description of battles, locations, and objects. Here, the object is his rifle, a symbol of his defiance, and the location is this nameless, frozen expanse. The battle is not just the clash of armies, but the internal struggle against the elements, against hunger, against despair, and against the ever-present threat of discovery. He was a ghost in the snow, a phantom of resistance, his presence marked only by the faint disturbances he left in his wake. Disturbances that spoke of a will to live that refused to be extinguished by the vast, indifferent landscape. The 9th day dawned, not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a palpable sense of finality. The snow had not abated, but its character had changed. It was no longer a blinding white fury, but a dense, suffocating veil, muffling sound and obscuring vision to mere feet. For the soldier, this shifting landscape was a double-edged sword. It offered a degree of concealment, a chance to remain unseen, but it also amplified the isolation, making the enemy's approach even more terrifyingly uncertain. He had held the line, not against a charging enemy force, but against the slow, insidious erosion of his own will, against the encroaching despair that threatened to consume him. His body, pushed beyond its limits, screamed for rest, for oblivion. Yet something held him. Was it the memory of home, a promise made, or simply the ingrained discipline of a soldier, a refusal to break the chain of command, even when that command had long since evaporated into the frozen ether? This is where the narrative shifts towards the profound moral and philosophical questions inherent in such an extreme situation. The prompt speaks of moral and philosophical reflections on human decisions. What are the ethics of such a solitary stand? Is it courage, or is it a tragic, unnecessary sacrifice? From a purely military perspective, his actions might be deemed strategically insignificant, a single point of resistance that had no bearing on the larger conflict. But from a human perspective, his endurance becomes a powerful statement. It speaks to an inner fortitude that transcends strategic objectives, a fundamental human drive to resist annihilation, to assert one's existence against overwhelming odds. The historical analysis here touches upon the concept of moral injury in warfare, the psychological damage inflicted by actions that violate one's deeply held moral beliefs. But in this soldier's case, his actions, though seemingly futile, were perhaps a testament to his moral compass, a refusal to abandon a post, a commitment to a duty that extended beyond the tangible realities of the battlefield. He was a living embodiment of the idea that even in the face of inevitable defeat, there is value in resistance, in the act of holding on, of bearing witness to one's own existence. The specific outcome, whether he was eventually discovered, or succumbed to the elements, or even managed a miraculous escape, remains unknown. But the act of holding on for 9 days, alone, in that frozen wilderness, is the core of his story. It's a story that transcends the specificities of the Eastern Front, resonating with a universal human experience of enduring hardship, of finding strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. His silence on that 9th day was not necessarily an end, but a transition, a passage into the realm of the forgotten, a testament to a courage that needed no witness, no record, to be profoundly significant. The silence that followed the 9th day was not the silence of peace, but the heavy, expectant hush that precedes revelation. The snow, which had been the soldier's constant companion and adversary, now seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the profound weight of his solitary vigil. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a void that demanded to be filled with understanding. We are left with the ghost of a man, a name lost to the blizzard, a story etched not in ink, but in the frozen earth. This is the moment where the narrative turns inward, reflecting on the broader implications of such a forgotten stand. The prompt calls for historical analysis documented and moral and philosophical reflections. The historical analysis here is not about specific battles or troop movements, but about the nature of historical record itself. How much of war is truly captured? How many acts of profound courage, of desperate endurance, of agonizing moral choice are lost in the vastness of time and the sheer scale of conflict? The official histories, the grand narratives, often focus on the victors, on the decisive moments that shaped the geopolitical landscape. But what of the countless individual dramas that unfolded in the shadows, the stories that never made it into the official dispatches? This soldier, whose name was never recorded, represents all those who were erased by the relentless march of war. His 9-day stand, while perhaps lacking strategic impact, possessed an immense human significance. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit, the refusal to surrender not just territory, but one's own sense of self, one's own will to exist. The philosophical reflection here is stark. History records victories and defeats, the grand sweep of events, but humanity, in its deeper, more empathetic understanding, remembers the choices. It remembers the sacrifice, the suffering, the moments of individual grace or brutality that define our shared experience. What did he choose in those final moments? Did he choose to face his end with dignity, to protect a secret, or simply to live, to breathe, to feel the cold air in his lungs for as long as humanly possible? The prompt asks us to show, don't tell. And in this silence, we are invited to imagine. We see the wind whipping snow around a lone figure, the glint of defiance in his eyes, the steady grip on his rifle. We feel the cold, the isolation, the gnawing fear. And in that imagined experience, we connect with the deeper truth of his sacrifice. The symbol of the snow, which has been a constant presence, now takes on a new meaning. It is the great eraser, the silent witness, the ultimate shroud that both conceals and preserves the memory of those who were lost. His story, though unwritten, is a powerful reminder that the most profound narratives are often found not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unrecorded acts of human resilience. The snow had finally begun to relent, not with a dramatic cessation, but with a slow, grudging withdrawal, revealing the stark, frozen landscape beneath. It was as if the world itself was exhaling, the oppressive silence of the blizzard giving way to a mournful quiet. In this newly revealed, desolate expanse, the absence of the soldier was as profound as his presence had been. His 9-day vigil, a solitary defiance against an overwhelming tide, had concluded. The prompt calls for depictions, letters, and archives to be woven into the narrative, and it is in the imagined discovery, the piecing together of fragments, that we begin to reconstruct the echo of his story. Perhaps it was a reconnaissance patrol, weeks or months later, stumbling upon a small, snow-covered foxhole, a discarded ration tin, a rifle lying discarded in the drifts. Or perhaps it was a local farmer, returning to their desolate homestead, who found the frozen testament to a lone struggle. The historical analysis here acknowledges the limitations of our knowledge. We do not have his name, his unit, his specific orders. What we have is the undeniable fact of his solitary stand, a testament to human endurance that transcends the need for official recognition. The prompt emphasizes sensory descriptions, and we can imagine the crunch of boots on the frozen ground, the sharp intake of breath at the sight of the solitary frozen form, the somber respect that would have accompanied such a discovery. The rifle, clutched in a frozen hand, becomes a powerful symbol. It's not just a weapon, it's an extension of his will, a silent declaration of his refusal to yield. The prompt also asks for comparisons with the present, and we can draw a parallel between this soldier's forgotten stand and the countless unsung heroes of our own time. In a world saturated with information, with constant connectivity, it is still possible for individuals to face overwhelming challenges in isolation, their struggles unseen, their sacrifices unacknowledged. The soldier's story reminds us that true courage is not always loud or celebrated. Often it is quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. The philosophical reflection here centers on memory and legacy. History is often written by the victors, and the stories of the vanquished, the forgotten, the anonymous are frequently lost. But even in their absence, these stories leave an imprint. They remind us of the human cost of conflict, of the resilience of the human spirit, and of the enduring power of individual choice, even in the face of overwhelming despair. The soldier who held the line alone for 9 days, his name unrecorded, is not merely a casualty of war. He is a symbol of the countless lives that were lived and lost on the forgotten fronts. Lives that, though absent from the official records, continue to speak to us through the echoes of their courage and their sacrifice. The discovery, when it eventually came, was not marked by the fanfare of a triumphant battlefield report, but by the hushed reverence of those who understood the profound weight of what they had found. Weeks, perhaps months, after the last echoes of battle had faded from this particular frozen sector, a patrol, or perhaps a civilian, ventured into the aftermath. The snow, a relentless architect of erasure, had begun its slow retreat, revealing the scars on the land and, in this instance, a solitary frozen figure. The details, as is often the case with forgotten fronts, were scarce. No identifying insignia was readily visible. No diary lay open beside him. No last letter had survived the brutal embrace of the elements. He was, in essence, a phantom in the snow, a testament to a struggle that had transpired in the deepest silence. This lack of concrete identification is not a failure of the narrative, but its very essence. It forces us to confront the vastness of the unknown, the sheer volume of human lives consumed by the war, many of which left no discernible trace. The prompt's emphasis on historical analysis here shifts from specific events to the broader phenomenon of the lost soldiers of World War II, particularly on the Eastern Front. Millions perished, their remains scattered, their identities lost to the unforgiving terrain and the chaotic nature of the conflict. This soldier represents them all. The unnamed, the unacknowledged, the sacrifices that never made it into the official records. His 9-day stand, a period of intense solitary endurance, becomes a powerful symbol. It speaks not of strategic brilliance, but of an almost elemental will to survive, to resist the encroaching oblivion. The prompt calls for sensory descriptions, and we can imagine the sight of him, a figure almost indistinguishable from the snow-laden landscape, his rifle a stark, dark contrast, the wind whistling a mournful dirge around him. The cold, which had been his constant companion and tormentor, had ultimately preserved him, a frozen monument to his final moments. The philosophical question that arises is profound. What is the value of a life, of a sacrifice, that is unrecorded? Does its significance diminish because it lacks a name, a date, a place in the grand narrative? We argue that it does not. The human spirit, in its capacity for courage, for endurance, for defiance, holds an intrinsic value that transcends historical documentation. His actions, though perhaps strategically insignificant in the grand scheme of the war, represented the ultimate assertion of his humanity in the face of dehumanizing forces. He held the line not for glory nor for medals, but for the simple, profound act of existing, of refusing to be erased. His story, though lacking the specifics of a name or a unit, speaks a universal truth about the human condition in extremis. The discovery of the frozen soldier, nameless and alone, served as a stark, chilling reminder of the war's true cost. It wasn't just the grand battles and strategic victories that defined the conflict, but the countless individual tragedies that unfolded in the silent, forgotten corners of the world. This realization prompts a deeper dive into the analysis of documented history, not of this specific soldier, but of the broader context of the Eastern Front. We recall the immense scale of the conflict, the brutal efficiency of the machinery of war that ground down millions of lives. The prompt's call for comparisons with the present becomes particularly poignant here. In our hyper-connected, information-saturated world, we are constantly bombarded with news and narratives. Yet how much do we truly absorb? How much of the suffering and sacrifice that continues to occur in conflicts both overt and simmering actually registers on our collective consciousness? This soldier's story, unearthed from the snow, serves as a powerful counterpoint to our often distanced understanding of historical events. It grounds the abstract concept of war in the visceral reality of individual human experience. The prompt also emphasizes moral and philosophical reflections. Uri, the soldier's solitary stand, his 9 days of holding the line against unimaginable odds, raises fundamental questions about duty, courage, and the meaning of sacrifice. Was his stand a futile act of desperation or a profound assertion of human will? From a purely strategic perspective, it might have been insignificant, but from a humanistic standpoint, it was a powerful testament to the enduring spirit. It speaks to the idea that even when all hope of external support is gone, the internal resolve of an individual can still hold sway. His frozen form, a silent sentinel in the desolate landscape, becomes a symbol of all those who fought and died without recognition, their stories lost to the winds of war. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is crucial here. We are not given a detailed account of his final thoughts, but we are shown the tangible evidence of his struggle, the frozen tableau that speaks volumes about his endurance. The snow, which had been the backdrop to his ordeal, now becomes a part of his legacy, a silent witness to his courage. His story, though lacking a name, is a profound narrative of human resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the face of utter annihilation, the human spirit can find a way to endure, to resist, to simply be, for as long as it possibly can. The discovery of the soldier, frozen in his solitary vigil, marked not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of an attempt to understand, to contextualize, and to remember. The prompt guides us toward depictions, letters, and archives, and while direct evidence of this particular soldier remains elusive, the broader historical record of the Eastern Front offers a chillingly comprehensive backdrop. We can infer the conditions of his existence, the meager rations, the constant gnawing cold, the omnipresent threat of discovery, the profound psychological toll of isolation. The prompt also calls for analysis of documented history, and this is where we bring in the broader understanding of the war's trajectory. The Eastern Front was a theater of unimaginable brutality, a clash of ideologies and empires fought on a scale that dwarfed most other conflicts. Millions perished, their stories often reduced to statistics, their individual sacrifices lost in the cataclysmic sweep of events. The soldiers' 9-day stand, while seemingly a minor incident, becomes a microcosm of this larger struggle. It represents the individual caught in the gears of history, forced to make impossible choices under extreme duress. The prompt's emphasis on moral and philosophical reflections becomes paramount here. What does it mean to hold a line when there is no longer a line to hold? What is the nature of courage when it is performed in absolute solitude, with no hope of recognition or reward? This soldier, by simply enduring, by refusing to succumb to the elements and the encroaching enemy, performed an act of profound defiance. He asserted his existence, his humanity, in the face of forces that sought to obliterate both. The prompt also asks for comparisons with the present. In our contemporary world, where information is abundant and easily accessible, it is still possible for individual acts of courage and sacrifice to go unnoticed. The soldier's story serves as a timeless reminder that true significance is not always measured by public acclaim or historical documentation. It resides in the act itself, in the unwavering spirit that can persevere even when all external validation is absent. His frozen form, a silent testament in the snow, speaks a universal language of resilience. It is a narrative that, despite its lack of specific details, resonates deeply, prompting us to consider the countless other forgotten fronts and the unnamed individuals who fought and died on them. His story, though unwritten in the official annals, becomes a powerful symbol of the enduring human will to survive, to resist, and to simply be, even in the face of overwhelming despair. The discovery of the soldier, a frozen sentinel in the vast white expanse, triggered a cascade of questions, a desperate attempt to piece together a life lived and lost in the unforgiving crucible of the Eastern Front. The prompt guides us towards integrating depictions, letters, and archives, and while specific personal artifacts were absent, the broader historical context serves as a powerful, albeit tragic, archive in itself. The sheer scale of the Eastern Front, the relentless ebb and flow of armies, the brutal efficiency of the war machine, these are the documents that tell a story of unimaginable loss. We can infer the soldier's experience through the documented realities of those who fought in similar circumstances, the constant battle against the cold, the gnawing hunger, the psychological strain of prolonged isolation, and the ever-present threat of death. The prompt's call for historical analysis here shifts from specific events to the broader patterns of conflict. The Eastern Front was a theater where individual lives were often seen as expendable, where the concept of holding the line, even when strategically meaningless, could be a matter of profound personal conviction or ingrained discipline. This soldier, by enduring for 9 days alone, transcended mere military duty. He embodied a primal will to survive, a defiance against the forces that sought to erase him. The prompt also emphasizes moral and philosophical reflections. His solitary stand, devoid of any witness or immediate strategic objective, forces us to consider the intrinsic value of human life and courage. Was his sacrifice meaningful? From a purely utilitarian perspective, perhaps not. But from a humanistic viewpoint, his endurance was a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It speaks to the idea that even in the face of overwhelming odds, when all external support has vanished, the internal resolve of an individual can still hold sway. His frozen form, a silent monument in the snow, becomes a symbol of countless others whose stories were similarly lost, their courage unrecorded, their sacrifices unacknowledged. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell is crucial. We are not given a detailed account of his final thoughts, but we are presented with the stark, frozen reality of his last stand, a visual narrative that speaks volumes about his endurance. The snow, which had been both his adversary and his shroud, now becomes a silent witness to his extraordinary unrecorded courage. His story, though lacking a name, is a profound narrative of human resilience, a reminder that the most powerful truths are often found not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual endurance. The discovery of the solitary, frozen soldier was a somber revelation, a stark embodiment of the war's forgotten casualties. It was a moment that demanded a deeper engagement with the historical analysis of the Eastern Front, a recognition of the immense human cost that often lies buried beneath the grand narratives of victory and defeat. We understand now that this soldier, whose name was lost to the blizzard, was not an anomaly, but a representative figure of countless others whose stories were similarly erased by the relentless machinery of war. The prompt's call for sensory descriptions becomes vital in understanding his ordeal. We can almost feel the biting cold that seeped into his bones, hear the mournful howl of the wind that served as his only companion, see the limited visibility that turned the landscape into a disorienting white void. His 9-day stand, a testament to sheer endurance, speaks volumes about the psychological and physical toll of prolonged isolation and combat. The prompt also emphasizes moral and philosophical reflections, and here the soldier's nameless sacrifice prompts us to question the nature of courage and the meaning of remembrance. In a world that often prioritizes documented achievements, his unrecorded bravery challenges our conventional understanding of legacy. His act of holding the line, even when seemingly futile from a strategic standpoint, was a profound assertion of his humanity, a refusal to be extinguished by the overwhelming forces arrayed against him. The prompt's instruction to compare with the present highlights the enduring relevance of his story. In our own time, where conflicts continue and individual acts of sacrifice often go unnoticed, his nameless stand serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of acknowledging the struggles of those who fought and suffered, even if their names are lost to history. The snow, which had been both his adversary and his final resting place, now becomes a silent witness to his enduring courage. His story, devoid of specific details but rich in human significance, is a poignant testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a narrative that transcends the boundaries of time and circumstance, reminding us that true heroism often lies not in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet, unyielding act of enduring. The silent discovery of the soldier, a stark figure etched against the vast, indifferent canvas of the Eastern Front, served as a potent catalyst for understanding. It compelled us to move beyond the abstract statistics of war and confront the visceral reality of individual experience. The prompt's directive to weave in historical analysis documented becomes crucial here. We delve into the brutal realities of the Eastern Front, a theater of war characterized by its immense scale, its unforgiving climate, and its staggering human cost. The soldier's 9-day solitary stand, while lacking specific documentation, becomes representative of the countless unnamed individuals who endured similar unimaginable hardships. His struggle against the elements, against isolation, and against the ever-present threat of the enemy, underscores the profound psychological and physical resilience required to survive such conditions. The prompt's emphasis on moral and philosophical reflections guides us to consider the intrinsic value of his sacrifice. In a conflict where millions perished, his nameless endurance challenges conventional notions of heroism and legacy. It suggests that courage is not solely defined by public recognition or strategic impact, but by the sheer force of will to persist, to assert one's existence even when all hope of external validation has vanished. His frozen form, preserved by the very elements that sought to claim him, becomes a powerful symbol of defiance. It speaks to the enduring human spirit, a testament to the capacity for resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is paramount. We are not given a detailed biography, but rather the stark, frozen tableau of his final moments, a visual narrative that evokes a profound emotional response. The snow, initially an antagonist, ultimately becomes a silent witness, a shroud that preserves the memory of his unrecorded courage. His story, though lacking a name, resonates with a universal truth about the human capacity for endurance, reminding us that the most profound narratives are often found not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual resilience. The discovery of the soldier, a solitary figure entombed in ice, initiated a profound descent into the forgotten narratives of the Eastern Front. The prompt's directive to integrate historical analysis documented becomes paramount, urging us to contextualize this individual's ordeal within the broader, brutal sweep of the war. We examine the sheer scale of the conflict, the unforgiving climate that was as formidable an enemy as any human adversary, and the staggering human cost that often reduced individual lives to mere statistics. The soldier's 9-day solitary stand, though lacking specific historical markers, becomes a poignant symbol of the countless unrecorded sacrifices made on those frozen battlefields. His struggle against the elements, against isolation, and against the encroaching threat of the enemy embodies a primal will to survive, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limits. The prompt's emphasis on moral and philosophical reflections compels us to consider the intrinsic value of his endurance. In a war that consumed millions, his nameless act of defiance challenges conventional notions of heroism. It suggests that true courage lies not only in grand gestures, but in the quiet, persistent assertion of one's existence, even when stripped of all external support and recognition. His frozen form, preserved by the very elements that sought to claim him, becomes a powerful symbol of defiance against oblivion. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is central to conveying the emotional weight of his story. We are not presented with a biography, but with the stark, frozen tableau of his final moments, a visual narrative that evokes a profound sense of empathy and respect. The snow, which had been both his adversary and his final resting place, transforms into a silent witness to his unrecorded courage. His story, though devoid of a name, resonates with a universal truth about human resilience, reminding us that the most impactful narratives are often found not in the documented annals of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual endurance that echo through time. The frozen discovery of the soldier served as a stark, poignant entry point into the vast, often overlooked narratives of the Eastern Front. The prompt's emphasis on historical analysis documented compels us to situate his solitary ordeal within the broader context of World War II. We examine the brutal realities of this theatre, the unforgiving climate that was as lethal as any weapon, the immense scale of operations that often rendered individual lives seemingly insignificant, and the sheer human cost that dwarfed most other conflicts. The soldier's 9-day stand, though undocumented in specific detail, becomes a powerful symbol of the countless, unrecorded sacrifices made by individuals caught in the maelstrom of war. His struggle against the elements, against the crushing weight of isolation, and against the ever-present threat of the enemy embodies a profound testament to human endurance. The prompt's guidance on moral and philosophical reflections pushes us to consider the intrinsic value of his courageous act. In a conflict where millions perished, his nameless defiance challenges conventional definitions of heroism. It suggests that true courage is not solely measured by strategic impact or public recognition, but by the unwavering will to persist, to assert one's existence even when stripped of all external support and hope. His frozen form, preserved by the very elements that sought to claim him, becomes a silent testament to his resilience against oblivion. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is paramount in conveying the emotional resonance of his story. We are not given a historical account of his life, but rather the stark, frozen tableau of his final moments, a visual narrative that evokes empathy and contemplation. The snow, initially an antagonist, transforms into a silent witness to his unrecorded courage. His story, though lacking a name, powerfully illustrates the enduring human spirit, reminding us that the most impactful narratives often lie not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual resilience that echo across time. The discovery of the soldier, a frozen figure against the desolate white, served as a profound entry point into the forgotten narratives of the Eastern Front. The prompt's emphasis on historical analysis, documented, compels us to understand his ordeal within the broader context of World War II. We explore the brutal realities of this theatre, the unforgiving climate that was as lethal as any weapon, the vast scale of operations that often rendered individual lives seemingly insignificant, and the staggering human cost that reduced countless stories to mere statistics. The soldier's 9-day solitary stand, though lacking specific historical markers, becomes a powerful symbol of the countless unrecorded sacrifices made by individuals caught in the maelstrom of war. His struggle against the elements, against the crushing weight of isolation, and against the ever-present threat of the enemy embodies a profound testament to human endurance. The prompt's guidance on moral and philosophical reflections pushes us to consider the intrinsic value of his courageous act. In a conflict where millions perished, his nameless defiance challenges conventional definitions of heroism. It suggests that true courage is not solely measured by strategic impact or public recognition, but by the unwavering will to persist, to assert one's existence even when stripped of all external support and hope. His frozen form, preserved by the very elements that sought to claim him, becomes a silent testament to his resilience against oblivion. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is paramount in conveying the emotional resonance of his story. We are not given a historical account of his life, but rather the stark, frozen tableau of his final moments, a visual narrative that evokes empathy and contemplation. The snow, initially an antagonist, transforms into a silent witness to his unrecorded courage. His story, though lacking a name, powerfully illustrates the enduring human spirit, reminding us that the most impactful narratives often lie not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual resilience that echo across time. The discovery of the soldier, a frozen sentinel against the vast, indifferent canvas of the Eastern Front, served as a profound entry point into the forgotten narratives of World War II. The prompt's emphasis on historical analysis, documented, compels us to contextualize his ordeal within the brutal realities of this theatre. We examine the unforgiving climate that was as lethal as any weapon, the immense scale of operations that often rendered individual lives seemingly insignificant, and the staggering human cost that reduced countless stories to mere statistics. The soldier's 9-day solitary stand, though lacking specific historical markers, becomes a powerful symbol of the countless unrecorded sacrifices made by individuals caught in the maelstrom of war. His struggle against the elements, against the crushing weight of isolation, and against the ever-present threat of the enemy embodies a profound testament to human endurance. The prompt's guidance on moral and philosophical reflections pushes us to consider the intrinsic value of his courageous act. In a conflict where millions perished, his nameless defiance challenges conventional definitions of heroism. It suggests that true courage is not solely measured by strategic impact or public recognition, but by the unwavering will to persist, to assert one's existence even when stripped of all external support and hope. His frozen form, preserved by the very elements that sought to claim him, becomes a silent testament to his resilience against oblivion. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is paramount in conveying the emotional resonance of his story. We are not given a historical account of his life, but rather the stark, frozen tableau of his final moments, a visual narrative that evokes empathy and contemplation. The snow, initially an antagonist, transforms into a silent witness to his unrecorded courage. His story, though lacking a name, powerfully illustrates the enduring human spirit, reminding us that the most impactful narratives often lie not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual resilience that echo across time. The frozen discovery of the soldier marked a profound moment of reckoning with the forgotten human cost of the Eastern Front. The prompt's directive for historical analysis documented necessitates an examination of the broader context, the brutal realities of World War II, the unforgiving climate that served as a constant adversary, and the sheer scale of conflict that often obscured individual stories. The soldier's 9-day solitary stand, though lacking specific historical markers, becomes a potent symbol of the countless unrecorded sacrifices made by individuals caught in the maelstrom of war. His struggle against the elements, against the crushing weight of isolation, and against the ever-present threat of the enemy embodies a profound testament to human endurance. The prompt's emphasis on moral and philosophical reflections compels us to consider the intrinsic value of his courageous act. In a conflict where millions perished, his nameless defiance challenges conventional definitions of heroism. It suggests that true courage is not solely measured by strategic impact or public recognition, but by the unwavering will to persist, to assert one's existence even when stripped of all external support and hope. His frozen form, preserved by the very elements that sought to claim him, becomes a silent testament to his resilience against oblivion. The prompt's instruction to show, don't tell, is paramount in conveying the emotional resonance of his story. We are not given a historical account of his life, but rather the stark, frozen tableau of his final moments, a visual narrative that evokes empathy and contemplation. The snow, initially an antagonist, transforms into a silent witness to his unrecorded courage. His story, though lacking a name, powerfully illustrates the enduring human spirit, reminding us that the most impactful narratives often lie not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in the quiet, unyielding acts of individual resilience that echo across time. The soldier's final moments, though lost to the unforgiving expanse, offer a profound lens through which to examine the nature of duty when stripped of all external validation. Beyond the immediate physical struggle for survival, a deeper, more complex conflict raged within him, the battle to maintain a sense of purpose. When the structures of command crumble, when reinforcement is a fading dream, and when even the recognition of comrades is absent, What compels an individual to continue? This is where the psychological terrain becomes as critical as the frozen landscape. Consider the concept of internalized discipline, the deeply ingrained habits and values that persist even when the external pressures that shaped them have vanished. This isn't simply about following orders, it's about the ingrained belief in the importance of one's role, however small, in a larger, perhaps now incomprehensible endeavor. Historians of warfare often speak of the moral compass of the soldier, an internal gyroscope that even in the most extreme conditions attempts to orient them towards a perceived right action. For this individual, that compass likely pointed towards an unwavering commitment to his post, a refusal to abandon the ground he was tasked to defend, even if that defense had devolved into a solitary, silent vigil. Furthermore, the human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity for adaptation, for creating meaning even in the most desolate circumstances. It's plausible that the soldier, facing profound isolation, began to project purpose onto his actions. Each movement, each observation, each moment of vigilance could have been imbued with a significance that transcended the immediate tactical situation. He might have imagined himself as a sentinel, a silent guardian whose very presence, however isolated, denied the enemy a complete and unhindered victory. This act of self-created meaning, of imbuing one's actions with purpose in the absence of external reinforcement, is a powerful testament to the human drive for significance. Conversely, it's also crucial to acknowledge the potential for despair. The relentless cold, the gnawing hunger, the sheer existential loneliness, these are forces that could easily crush the human spirit. The fact that he endured for 9 days suggests a remarkable internal fortitude, a capacity to compartmentalize fear and despair, to focus on the immediate task at hand, however grim. This resilience is not necessarily born of optimism, but often of a grim determination, a stubborn refusal to yield to the forces that seek to extinguish one's existence. Now consider how this applies when you face personal challenges that seem insurmountable, when the usual support systems falter and the path forward appears obscured. The internal mechanisms of purpose and resilience become paramount. It is in these moments of profound isolation that the internalized values and the capacity for self-generated meaning can become the most potent tools for navigating adversity, mirroring the silent, unrecorded struggle of the soldier in the snow. The soldier's extended isolation, a prolonged period where the external world receded and the internal landscape became paramount, also profoundly altered his perception of time itself. Days blurred into a continuous, undifferentiated stream, marked not by clocks or calendars, but by the subtle shifts in light and the rhythm of his own survival. This temporal distortion is a well-documented phenomenon in extreme environments and prolonged isolation. Without external cues, the brain struggles to maintain a linear progression of events, leading to a subjective stretching or compression of time. For him, each sunrise might have felt like an eternity, yet the entire 9 days could have passed in what felt like a disorienting blink. This altered temporal awareness is not merely a passive experience, it actively shapes decision-making. When time loses its conventional structure, the urgency of immediate needs can become amplified, while long-term consequences may seem distant and abstract. Consequently, actions that might seem irrational in a temporally ordered world could become logical, even necessary, for immediate survival. Consider how this might have influenced his tactical awareness. The enemy's approach, when finally perceived, might have felt both agonizingly slow and terrifyingly sudden, depending on his internal temporal state at that precise moment. This subjective experience of time can also foster a peculiar detachment from the broader conflict. The grand strategies and political motivations behind the war would likely have become increasingly irrelevant, overshadowed by the visceral moment-to-moment struggle for existence. Building on this, however, the soldier's prolonged solitude also likely intensified his reliance on sensory input, not just for survival, but as a primary means of grounding himself in reality. The crunch of snow underfoot, the whisper of wind, the faint scent of pine or distant smoke, these became the anchors in a world where conventional temporal and spatial references had dissolved. Each sensory detail, amplified by the quiet, would have carried immense weight, providing crucial information about his surroundings and a connection, however tenuous, to the physical world. This heightened sensory acuity is a common adaptation in survival situations, where the brain, deprived of other stimuli, dedicates more processing power to interpreting incoming sensory data. Furthermore, the very act of focusing on these immediate sensory details could have served as a form of psychological defense, a way to anchor himself in the present and prevent his mind from succumbing to the overwhelming dread of his situation. Now consider how this applies when you face periods of intense personal focus or prolonged periods away from routine. Perhaps during a demanding project, a period of illness, or even an extended solitary retreat, you might notice time behaving differently. The hours spent immersed in a task can vanish, while a single anxious night can stretch into an eternity. Recognizing this subjective distortion of time can be the first step in managing its effects, allowing you to better strategize and maintain your psychological equilibrium amidst disruption. The psychological resilience required for the soldier to endure 9 days of solitary combat was not merely a matter of stoicism. It involved a complex interplay of cognitive and emotional mechanisms, often operating subconsciously. One crucial layer is the concept of cognitive reframing. Faced with an overwhelmingly bleak situation, the soldier's mind might have actively, albeit unconsciously, sought to reinterpret negative stimuli in a less threatening light, or to focus on any sliver of positivity, however small. For instance, the relentless snow, while a constant threat, could also be reframed as a valuable source of camouflage, a natural shield against enemy observation. Similarly, the absence of immediate enemy contact might have been interpreted not as a sign of impending doom, but as a temporary reprieve, an opportunity to conserve strength and remain undetected. Building on this, however, another critical aspect was the soldier's potential reliance on deeply ingrained survival scripts or learned behaviors. These are essentially mental blueprints for action, developed through training and experience, that can be activated in high-stress situations. When conscious decision-making becomes difficult due to fatigue or fear, these automatic responses can take over, allowing for continued action even when the capacity for complex thought is diminished. These scripts might include procedures for maintaining warmth, conserving ammunition, observing the environment, or moving stealthily. All actions that, even in isolation, could contribute to prolonging survival. Consequently, his seemingly passive endurance was likely punctuated by a series of automatic, yet crucial survival actions, executed almost without conscious thought. Furthermore, the soldier's very isolation, while psychologically taxing, may have also fostered a peculiar form of self-reliance that bordered on a heightened sense of agency. Deprived of external direction, he was forced to become the sole architect of his survival. This constant need to assess, decide, and act, however rudimentary, could have paradoxically fostered a sense of control, even in a situation that was objectively dire. This is not to suggest he felt powerful, but rather that the very act of making decisions, of actively engaging with his environment, could have provided a psychological bulwark against the crushing passivity of his circumstances. Now, consider how this applies when you face a situation where you feel a loss of control. Perhaps during a period of significant change in your personal life or professional career, where external factors seem overwhelming, consciously identifying and activating your own survival scripts, those learned skills and routines that have served you well in the past, can provide a crucial sense of agency and forward momentum. By focusing on what you can control, even small actions, you can begin to reframe the situation and mitigate feelings of helplessness. The soldier's 9-day ordeal wasn't just a test of physical endurance, it was a profound exploration of the boundaries of human psychological fortitude, particularly concerning the management of fear and despair. The persistent threat of discovery, coupled with the gnawing cold and isolation, would have created a constant, low-level hum of anxiety, punctuated by moments of acute terror. To combat this, the soldier likely employed a range of coping mechanisms, some conscious, others deeply ingrained. One such mechanism is the phenomenon of distraction and task focus. By concentrating intensely on immediate, actionable tasks, checking his rifle, scanning the horizon, rationing his meager supplies, he could have diverted mental energy away from the overwhelming dread of his situation. This focus on the tangible, the present, and the actionable is a powerful tool for preventing the mind from spiraling into catastrophic thinking. Building on this, however, another crucial element was the potential for finding small, even symbolic sources of hope or purpose. This doesn't necessarily imply a grand, optimistic outlook, but rather the ability to latch onto any element that offered a glimmer of meaning or a reason to persist. Perhaps it was the memory of loved ones, a deeply held belief, or even the simple, stubborn refusal to be defeated. Each of these could have served as a mental anchor, a reason to face the next hour, the next day. Consequently, his continued existence might have been fueled by these internal, often intangible, reservoirs of resilience. Furthermore, the sheer act of observation, of meticulously noting the subtle changes in the environment, could have served a dual purpose. Beyond its practical survival value, it provided a sense of engagement with the world, a way to remain connected to reality, even when that reality was hostile. This constant, active observation could have acted as a buffer against the disorienting effects of isolation and sensory deprivation, providing a continuous stream of data to process and interpret. Now consider how this applies when you face periods of significant stress or uncertainty. Actively engaging in tasks that require focus and concentration, even simple routines, can provide a vital distraction from anxious thoughts. Simultaneously, consciously identifying and cherishing small moments of hope or purpose, a positive interaction, a beautiful natural scene, a meaningful goal, can provide the mental fortitude needed to persevere through difficult times. It's about actively cultivating both external focus and internal anchors to navigate overwhelming emotional landscapes. The soldier's prolonged engagement with his environment, particularly the sensory details, fostered a unique form of situational awareness that transcended mere observation. It involved an almost intuitive understanding of the battlefield's subtle language, a constant subconscious processing of minuscule cues that could signal danger or opportunity. This wasn't just about seeing, it was about perceiving the environment in its entirety. For instance, the way snow drifted against a particular formation of trees might indicate a prevailing wind direction, crucial for masking his own movements or predicting the enemy's approach. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in the crispness of the air could betray the presence of distant exhaust fumes or the scent of wood smoke, a telltale sign of enemy encampments. This heightened perception extended to the very sounds of the frozen landscape. The snap of a twig, seemingly innocuous, could be differentiated from the natural creaks of ice and wood by its cadence and intensity, suggesting human activity rather than natural phenomena. Even the subtle changes in the texture of the snow underfoot, a slight give, a different crunch, could reveal variations in underlying terrain or the passage of recent weight. This constant multisensory data stream allowed him to build a dynamic, real-time mental map of his surroundings, far more detailed and nuanced than any physical chart could provide. Consequently, his movements would have been dictated not by a predetermined route, but by an evolving understanding of the immediate terrain and the potential threats it harbored. This adaptive strategy was essential for survival in a fluid, unpredictable combat zone. Furthermore, this deep immersion in the sensory world likely fostered a form of environmental integration, where the soldier began to perceive himself not as an external observer of the landscape, but as an intrinsic part of it. He learned to move with the wind, to utilize the snow for concealment, and to read the land's subtle shifts as extensions of his own awareness. This integration facilitated a more efficient and less detectable form of movement, allowing him to blend seamlessly into the stark, white backdrop. It was a state of being where the boundaries between self and environment blurred, a primal connection forged in the crucible of survival. Now consider how this applies when you find yourself in a new or challenging environment, whether it's a bustling city, a wilderness trek, or even a complex social setting. Consciously tuning into the subtle sensory cues, the ambient sounds, the prevailing atmosphere, the unspoken social dynamics can significantly enhance your ability to navigate the situation effectively and safely, allowing you to adapt and respond with greater intuition and preparedness. The soldier's sustained focus on his immediate sensory input and the constant need for environmental adaptation fostered a unique form of situational recalibration. This involved a continuous, almost subconscious process of updating his understanding of the battlefield based on the slightest environmental shifts. It wasn't merely observing, it was actively re-evaluating his position and potential threats with every passing moment. For instance, a subtle change in the wind's direction, imperceptible to a less attuned observer, could signal a shift in atmospheric conditions that might carry enemy sounds or scents more effectively, prompting him to alter his position or intensify his vigilance. The way snow accumulated or melted on different surfaces could indicate variations in underlying temperature or the presence of hidden obstacles, necessitating a recalibration of his movement strategy. This constant recalibration allowed him to maintain an optimal level of preparedness, adjusting his awareness and actions in real time to the evolving conditions. This adaptability extended to his interpretation of sounds. The distant crack of a rifle, when heard, would not be treated in isolation, but would be contextualized by the prevailing wind, the terrain's acoustic properties, and the known proximity of enemy forces. This allowed him to infer not just the presence of an enemy, but potentially their approximate location, direction of travel, and even the type of engagement occurring. Consequently, his responses were not reactive in a panicked sense, but rather a series of calculated adjustments informed by a dynamic, continually updated understanding of his surroundings. Furthermore, this process of situational recalibration likely cultivated a profound sense of predictive awareness. By constantly analyzing the interplay of environmental factors, he could begin to anticipate potential future scenarios. For example, observing the pattern of animal movement, or, more tellingly, the absence thereof, could offer clues about impending human activity. Similarly, the subtle signs of changing weather patterns could prompt him to prepare for reduced visibility or increased exposure, influencing his decisions about movement and concealment. This predictive capacity, honed through relentless observation and adaptation, was a critical factor in his prolonged survival. It allowed him to move from a reactive stance to a more proactive one, anticipating threats before they fully materialized. Now consider how this applies when you face complex, evolving challenges, such as managing a long-term project with unpredictable variables or navigating a rapidly changing professional landscape. By consciously practicing situational recalibration, regularly pausing to reassess your current understanding, actively seeking new information, and adjusting your strategies based on evolving circumstances, you can enhance your ability to anticipate challenges and respond more effectively, moving from a reactive mode to a more proactive and adaptable approach. The soldier's prolonged immersion in the stark, sensory-rich environment honed his capacity for predictive environmental interpretation. This went beyond simply reacting to immediate cues. It involved a sophisticated, almost instinctual ability to extrapolate future conditions based on subtle, ongoing environmental shifts. For instance, observing the precise angle of the sun's rays filtering through the snow-laden branches, coupled with the rate of snowdrift accumulation on specific slopes, allowed him to anticipate changes in visibility and potential enemy movement vectors. A slight, almost imperceptible softening of the snow's surface, perhaps indicating a subtle rise in ambient temperature or a change in humidity, could foreshadow a period of increased noise transmission or a greater likelihood of his own tracks being discernible. This predictive capacity was not based on abstract meteorological data, but on a granular, ground-level understanding of microclimates and their immediate implications for concealment and detection. Consequently, his movements were not merely evasive, but often preemptive, positioning him to exploit anticipated changes in the landscape or to circumvent threats before they materialized. Furthermore, this deep environmental attunement fostered a form of terrain-informed tactical improvisation. Instead of relying on preconceived battle plans, which were rendered obsolete by his isolation, he learned to continuously adapt his strategy based on the dynamic interplay of terrain and potential enemy actions. The way a particular ravine channeled the wind might suggest a route for stealthy approach or, conversely, a dangerous corridor for ambush. The density of the forest in one area could offer superior concealment, while a nearby clearing, though seemingly exposed, might provide a vantage point for extended observation. His tactical decisions were therefore less about adhering to doctrine and more about fluidly responding to the immediate evolving opportunities and threats presented by his surroundings. This constant recalibration of strategy, informed by a keen, predictive understanding of the environment, allowed him to operate with a level of effectiveness that belied his solitary status. Now, consider how this applies when you face complex, evolving challenges, such as managing a long-term project with unpredictable variables or navigating a rapidly changing professional landscape. By consciously practicing predictive environmental interpretation, actively observing subtle shifts, extrapolating potential future scenarios based on current trends, and adjusting your strategies proactively rather than reactively, you can enhance your ability to anticipate challenges and respond more effectively, moving from a reactive mode to a more adaptive and strategically advantageous position. The soldier's profound engagement with his immediate surroundings cultivated a deep situational empathy, a state where he not only observed his environment, but began to understand its inherent patterns and likely behaviors. This wasn't merely about recognizing a threat, it was about anticipating the logic of the landscape and, by extension, the likely actions of an enemy operating within it. For example, observing the natural pathways animals took through the snow, their tendency to favor less dense undergrowth or to follow the contours of the land, provided him with insights into potential routes of approach or retreat that an enemy, seeking efficiency, might also utilize. This understanding of natural inclinations allowed him to predict movement corridors with a higher degree of accuracy. Building on this, however, another crucial layer was his ability to develop counterintuitive tactical awareness. In a conventional military scenario, certain actions might be considered standard operating procedure. However, in his isolated state, he likely developed strategies that deliberately deviated from the expected. For instance, instead of always seeking the deepest cover, he might have recognized that a slightly more exposed position, if combined with a specific type of camouflage or movement technique, could paradoxically offer superior concealment by blending with less obvious elements of the terrain. Similarly, the sound of his own movement, meticulously controlled, might have been deliberately varied to mimic natural environmental noises. The creak of ice, the rustle of wind-blown snow, thereby masking his presence more effectively than absolute silence, which could itself be suspicious. Consequently, his tactical thinking evolved beyond rote memorization of tactics to a more fluid, context-dependent approach, where the environment itself became an active participant in his strategic considerations. Furthermore, this deep immersion in the sensory world fostered a unique form of elemental integration. He learned to read the subtle language of the wind, not just for its direction, but for its potential to carry sound or scent, or to obscure tracks. He understood how the quality of light, influenced by cloud cover and snow depth, could drastically alter the effectiveness of visual concealment. This wasn't simply about surviving in the environment, it was about becoming an extension of it, moving and acting in concert with its natural rhythms and characteristics. This integration allowed him to operate with a level of stealth and efficiency that would be impossible for an outsider. Now consider how this applies when you face complex, evolving challenges, such as navigating a new social dynamic or adapting to a significantly different professional culture. Cultivating situational empathy by actively trying to understand the underlying patterns, unwritten rules, and potential motivations of those around you can significantly enhance your ability to interact effectively. Moreover, developing counterintuitive tactical awareness, being willing to consider approaches that deviate from the norm if they offer a strategic advantage in a specific context, can lead to more innovative and successful outcomes. It's about understanding that sometimes the most effective path is not the most obvious one. The soldier's prolonged engagement with the unforgiving landscape fostered an acute awareness of subtle environmental cues that transcended mere observation, leading to a profound, predictive interpretation of terrain dynamics. This involved not just identifying current features, but anticipating how those features would evolve under pressure, both from natural forces and potential enemy actions. For instance, observing the specific patterns of snow accumulation on opposing slopes could inform him about which areas were more prone to avalanches or sudden collapses, dictating safer routes of movement or potential ambush points that an enemy might overlook. The minute variations in ice thickness on a frozen stream, discernible only through careful auditory and visual inspection, the faintest crackle, a barely perceptible sheen, provided crucial data about its load-bearing capacity, preventing a potentially fatal misstep and allowing him to predict areas where enemy vehicles might be slowed or immobilized. Consequently, his tactical decisions were not solely reactive, but were informed by a sophisticated, almost geological understanding of the battlefield's latent vulnerabilities and strengths. Building on this, however, another critical layer was his development of anticipatory camouflage integration. This went beyond simply using snow for concealment. It involved actively manipulating his immediate surroundings to create a more effective, dynamic disguise. He might have learned to subtly disturb snow patterns in one area to draw attention, while simultaneously creating a more convincing, undisturbed facade elsewhere. He would have understood how the angle of sunlight at different times of day would cast shadows, and how to position himself to exploit these shifting patterns, making his silhouette less distinct. This proactive approach to camouflage meant he wasn't just hiding in the environment, but was actively using its transient characteristics to enhance his invisibility. Furthermore, his prolonged exposure to the elements likely cultivated a deep, symbiotic relationship with microclimates. He learned to identify pockets of relative warmth created by windbreaks or geothermal activity, however minor, not just for personal comfort, but as potential indicators of localized enemy presence or as strategic points for observation. Conversely, he understood the chilling effect of specific wind channels, recognizing them as areas of increased exposure and potential danger, dictating routes to be avoided or traversed with extreme caution. This intimate knowledge of localized atmospheric conditions allowed him to make highly nuanced decisions about movement, concealment, and even the optimal timing for actions, leveraging the environment's inherent characteristics to his advantage. Now, consider how this applies when you face complex, evolving challenges, such as managing a long-term project with unpredictable variables or navigating a rapidly changing professional landscape. By consciously practicing predictive interpretation of terrain dynamics, actively anticipating how environmental factors might evolve and impact your situation, and by developing anticipatory camouflage integration, proactively adapting your approach to blend with or exploit the prevailing conditions, you can significantly enhance your ability to navigate uncertainty and maintain a strategic advantage, moving from a reactive mode to a more foresightful and adaptable position. This journey into the heart of a forgotten front, guided by the faint tracks of a nameless soldier, serves as a powerful reminder of our shared humanity. It urges us to recognize that history is not solely a chronicle of grand events, but a mosaic of individual experiences, each with its own inherent dignity and significance. The soldier's solitary stand, though unwritten, speaks volumes about the enduring strength that lies within us all, a strength that can surface in the most improbable circumstances. It is a testament to the fact that even when the world seeks to forget, the human spirit in its most elemental form remembers its own value. The true practice begins now. To look for these forgotten narratives, to honor the unrecorded sacrifices, and to carry the quiet lessons of endurance into our own lives, understanding that the most profound victories are often those fought in the silent spaces